interesting that he made the two changes that we've been talking about for weeks on end in terms of Royce O'Neal in the starting lineup and Thad Young taking Drew Eubanks minutes.
So the one thing that I do want to kind of dive into here are look at some of the guys that got things switched up on them tonight, like Royce O'Neal, Thad Young, Grayson Allen, because that was a huge conversation in our pregame show.
Right.
Obviously, a big change for this team. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, I asked you this question when we were watching the game. Do you think, because this happens, we saw reports of it last year with Monty Williams as well, do you think the change in the lineup came from Frank Vogel, or did it come from the brass upstairs? I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are, because we've seen this happen before.
I get it. I truthfully think you could make a case for either one. I think you could make a case for Frank Vogel understanding that after that loss last night, that he needed to change things up, that there needed to be a sense of desperation, that there needed to be a change of some sort that he could point to and say, at least I tried this. Okay. So I do think that's a possibility. But it's also interesting that he made the two changes that we've been talking about for weeks on end in terms of Royce O'Neal in the starting lineup and Thad Young taking Drew Eubanks minutes. And this was, I had asked before the Clippers game about, like what does Drew Eubanks bring to that backup center spot in your head? And he had said, like, we have a very super skilled team, so we like to have a more traditional big out there for rim protection, for size, for screen setting, all that stuff. So that's why they had been going with Drew in that spot behind Nurk, because they always wanted to have a guy in that mold out there. But to kind of just completely backtrack that one game later is interesting to me. It could be that Frank saw the light and was finally like, well, fuck, that was terrible. Let's switch things up. Or it could be that they were like, my brother in hoop, you got to make some changes, and these are the two that we need you to make.
My brother in hoop, I like that.
I feel like it's more of you're playing the same team back to back, and you went.
Could be that.
Well, this adjustment is kind of what I made in the second half, and it worked.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll just stick with that going into this game, because I don't think it was some giant epiphany.
No.
If it's the front office putting pressure, where was that 2 weeks ago? Like, I mean, if that's what they've truly felt was a missing part, why are you waiting until 3 games left to finally put that pressure on? Was that just the pain point yesterday that you could finally be like, hey, go do this? Maybe.
Based on what I felt in the locker room and the post-game comments, the way that Vogel and everyone were answering questions, the way that it was just so solemn in there, like, obviously it was a terrible loss, so guys are going to be upset, but it felt very different in terms of, like, this is the type of loss that could get a coach fired at the end of the season if they don't get where they want to be in the playoffs. This felt like the type of thing like, oh shit, the seed is warming up a little bit, or somebody's going to get held accountable here soon. So I feel like like you said, it might have been a pressure point, a pain point where it was like, we got to do something.
Is it a third option that, yes, it was a pressure point, pain point, but it didn't come from the front office or Frank? Yes. It came from the players saying, play these guys, damn it.
So
could have been.
That's kind of where I was going to go with this. I think yesterday put everything on the table. And I think that when you're navigating an NBA season, the coaches, you want to give the coaches the freedom to do what they need to do. That's why you hired them. I think there's times in the seasons where you're going to have conversations with your players, especially your star players, right? And I also think there's times where collectively the front office is going to get involved. I'm gonna say that I think after a night like last night, this was probably like all hands on deck. I need to hear from everybody. What are you thinking? What are you thinking on the bench? What are the players thinking? And I wouldn't be shocked if this was more of a collective decision where it's like, okay, players might. We saw. I'm gonna say something. We saw Devin pound the table a little bit a couple days ago in the Denver game for Thad Young. We kind of saw that. So I that's a great question, Linz, and I don't think there's a definite answer. But I can speculate myself that I think this was a combination of various factors, and that's kind of what was rolled out tonight.
I think the ideal situation would be that it was like a group conversation, and that's what they felt was best moving forward, and not one that came directly from the brass upstairs, because that's a sign of
we're
complete
losing faith.
dysfunction. Yes, we're falling apart. That's when you know the nail is going in the coffin.
Yeah.
But if it was a collective conversation of like, we can't have what happened last night happen again. What should we try differently? What do you guys think? What do you think? Like you said, Flex.
Yeah.
That makes me feel better that at least they haven't completely decided to hate each other yet.
You hope it's that, but if it is that, there were some tough words said for sure, because the way that players and coaches came out of whatever was said in that locker room didn't feel right, and you could see it in the way that they played to start this game for the most part. There's still some there's a lot of unsettled stuff that is going on that's underneath the surface here. And again, this is all speculation on our part as in terms of coach versus players versus front office who's in
But there is clearly
control.
something that is off. Like we've
It's
all
off.
been a
Absolutely.
part of basketball in some capacity long enough to know there is something that is just a little off.
The vibes are very immaculate right now.
Absolutely.